In this episode, we're going to take a look at some of the raddest rides in 80s toys, so stick around. Dorks and Dorkettes, and welcome to Nostalgia Syndrome. My name's Rob, and in this episode we are kicking off a new series that takes a look at some of the raddest rides in 80s toys. For sake of argument, I am using the term rides to apply to any manner of vehicles that have appeared in action figure toy lines throughout the 1980s. With this series, we will take a look at some of the most popular and some of the most unknown and forgotten vehicles that appeared in 80s action figure universes. Before we get started, let me just point out that there is one little bit of criteria that I'm looking for while discussing these vehicles, and that is these vehicles need to be able to hold the action figure. It's a pretty simple criteria to meet, and there are virtually hundreds of different vehicles that we can look at over time. So I am very excited to get things started. So without further ado, let's get it started. Number one on the list is the Trapper from the Inhumanoids line, released by Hasbro in 1986. Inhumanoids came at us with Hasbro's usual Trident-like attack. We had action figures, a comic book, and an animated series. Now, unfortunately, Inhumanoids did not prosper as well as some of Hasbro's other more popular properties, but the one thing Inhumanoids did have was a very unique story. And in that story, we saw scientists/superheroes called the Earth Corps that faced off against a trio of deadly subterranean creatures called the Inhumanoids. Now, the Inhumanoids themselves were huge, kaiju-like creatures that were very intelligent, for the most part, that erupted from the ground to attack cities and try to enslave mankind. Now, the Earth Corps utilized all manner of technology, everything from their powered exosuits to awesome vehicles. And that is what we're looking at today. Their one vehicle called the Trapper. The Trapper was an all-terrain vehicle that featured tread and wheels. It was meant to be taken underground and used to hunt down the Inhumanoids. It featured treads on the back and wheels on the front. Also on the front is a large yellow claw that could be used to grapple onto the large Inhumanoid figures. On the back, a one-man hovercraft type of harness that you could strap onto your characters and have them zip around. In your imagination, at least. Also on the back, you had an awesome grappling hook with a little knob that would help you winch up the rope. The Trapper would hold two figures comfortably, and they had a pull-down control panel that would go over them. Because of the larger size of the Earth Corps figures, the Trapper was a pretty big toy. I'm sure at the time it probably had a pretty high price point, and maybe that was one of the issues with this toy line. It kind of priced itself out of existence. I know the Inhumanoids figures were a bit pricey, but they were very large and very awesome. And the Inhumanoids story and their figures were a tad bit creepy. Maybe that was something that kind of scared off parents, from buying these for their kids. Either way, unfortunately, Inhumanoids did not really survive that long. But the Inhumanoids figures live in infamy with toy collectors, because they're just so freaking creepy and awesome. Number two on the list also comes from Hasbro, albeit from 1988. This time, it is the Roadster from the C.O.P.S toy line. Now, right off the bat, the Roadster came with the villain known as Turbo Two-Tone. This was your only chance to get this action figure, and he played a pretty big role in the cartoon. Again, Hasbro utilized that Trident-type attack that we had seen so many times before. Action figure, comic book, cartoon. In the past, Hasbro reached out to Marvel to do their comic book adaptations for their toy lines, but this time, for the C.O.P.S line, they went to DC. Just a little factoid, I know that did not factor into the reason that the C.O.P.S line wasn't as popular as it should have been. The C.O.P.S line were some of my favorites, and this is 1988 we're talking about, so I was 12 and still collecting these figures because they were just awesome. They were a large-scale action figure that featured all the great articulation of a G.I. Joe figure. They were big, clunky, and came packed with awesome accessories that utilized cap-firing technology. If you don't know, C.O.P.S fought crime in a future time. That was their slogan, and what that meant was, in the future, C.O.P.S utilized awesome technology to fight the crooks, which were the bad guys of the toy line and the show, and the comic book series. Now, both sides used technology in their favor and featured some really neat, like, super science type of reasoning for how things were. Anyway, onto the vehicle, the Roadster. Now, the Roadster, the first thing that catches your eye is the beautiful, vivid teal color of the vehicle. It was a one-seated vehicle where Turbo Two-Tone could sit in it, and it had a seatbelt that would go across his lap. The design is kind of like a mixture of F1 race car with the old-school flair of like a 50s Roadster. Remember those cap-firing accessories that I talked about the action figures coming with? Well, the Roadster had that as well. There was a large double-barreled cannon on the back that a second figure could stand at, and it was indeed cap-firing. I think it's really neat that the actual package artwork features a bit of the red paper caps coming off of the gun, which kind of incorporates the caps into the design, which makes it part of the universe. I don't really think there's a rhyme or reason, but it just looks really cool to have this red flag coming off of the back of the guns, and you know that it's for the paper caps that they came with. Other than its cap-firing gun and seatbelt, the Roadster did not really have a lot of playable features. Now, it came with Turbo Two-Tone, and he sat in it very well. And I'm sure that the biggest playable feature of this vehicle was its 4 working wheels that would allow it to shoot across the floor. Now, you don't really need a lot more than that. It's a very simple style, and I think that simplicity and the character kind of kept the price point down than what it could have been. I mean, if this had a ton of different features on it, it probably would have been priced way out of everyone's league because of the sheer size of the action figures. I mean, they were 5-inch figures, so you have to realize this car was kind of a good size. But one of the things I find most appealing about it is the color, like I mentioned, and the awesome stickers that adorned it. Anyway, on to number 3. Number 3 on the list is the Dread Crawler for Roboforce, released by Ideal in 1984. Now, Roboforce was a brilliant line. Very simplistic, but very cool. Roboforce featured some awesome play features for a kind of simplistic toy. Most of them featured a suction-cupped base that would allow you to put them virtually anywhere. I know for one, I played with mine in the bathtub a lot and would have him suction cupped to the sides of the tub. They also had buttons on the back that would cause their arms to wave about. They would have different weapons and accessories that would go into their hands or snap onto various parts of their body. And usually they would have a weapon system hidden amongst them somewhere, either a plate that would flip down on their chest, or their head itself going up and having guns for a face. Pretty cool. The Roboforce figures came with a mini comic book that helped to flesh out the universe. They also released one single pilot episode of a cartoon. I don't remember the Dreadcrawler being released, but from what I can see, it looks really rad. Now, it is not aesthetically pleasing. It's pretty simple in its design, but I guess when you're dealing with robots, you really don't need a lot of flash and flare. But what it had a claw on the front that actually worked. It had a periscope on the back, and the vehicle itself housed one evil Roboforce figure. Now, this was a battery-operated toy, and I'm not sure what it did, but I have an idea. On the front of the vehicle, you had an airbot, is what they call it. That was a simple bulb type of device that you would squeeze to put air into the vehicle. Now, they said this was the thing that caused it to power itself, this air. So I only assume it had kind of a hovercraft type action to it that would cause it to go across the floor. Now, I guess the air itself wouldn't be enough to get it to go, so maybe the batteries did something, or it's just an elaborate ruse and it just had normal wheels and you just turned it on and it went and just pretended it was air driven. I don't know. I wish I did. I mean, this is a strikingly cool looking vehicle, all black with red highlights, and just fits perfectly with the evil Roboforce villains. And something like this is just so simplistic because there's no seats, you just sat the robot in it because they're not really posable, that would offer unlimited play. Like, you could probably sit your He-Man figures in it. You could have a couple G.I. Joe sitting there and chill out. Well, of course, Cobra, not G.I. Joe, it's evil. Now, number 4 on the list is probably as cool as the dude who drove it. And that is the Karate Corvette from Chuck Norris's Karate Commandos, released by Kenner in 1986. Now, action star and martial artist Chuck Norris, yes, super popular in the 70s and 80s, but his popularity hit a new peak when Karate Commandos released. Unfortunately, this fact kind of gets lost in time, but Karate Commandos only had 5 episodes. I always thought it had more. It felt like on the Boomerang channel, they always aired it. And like all awesome 80s cartoons, you had a moral at the end provided by Mr. Norris himself. Now, Chuck Norris's Karate Commandos was just that. It was Chuck Norris with a gaggle of different martial artists and ninjas and even a sumo guy that fought other evil martial artists, ninjas, and not a sumo guy. Either way, one vehicle was released for the toy line, and that was Chuck's Karate Corvette. When you're dealing with a cherry red Corvette, you don't need much more to make it awesome. But leave it to Chuck Norris to up the ante, if you will. The Karate Corvette came with many hidden features, such as blades that would come out of the sides, a blade that would come out of the hood, and a catapult-like mechanism on the back that would fire large buzzsaw-esque shuriken. Just imagine, you're driving your awesome Corvette. It's a beautiful sunny day. You go to turn on the radio, and you accidentally hit the wrong button. Blades spring out of everything. You're slicing into the cars in the other lane. You're chopping into the car that's in front of you. I mean, it's Chuck Norris. What do you expect? Now, number 5 on the list also comes from Kenner in 1986, the exact same year that the Karate Corvette came out. Shocking. But this is definitely the most silly item on this list, and that is the Justice Jogger from the Superpowers line. Now, the Superpowers line was a great collection of DC Comics action figures, and it was a great Saturday morning cartoon that helped expose a lot of kids to DC superheroes that they probably didn't know existed. I know it sure fueled the comic dork in me. I love the Superpowers, and unfortunately I didn't have a single one of the action figures. Some of my more favorite DC characters are definite grail items for me in the Superpowers line, and one day I hope to get them. Now, the Justice Jogger, not so much. The thing that strikes me as kind of overkill is Superman piloting the Justice Jogger on the box. Now, the box states that it's an overland villain chaser. Now, why would Superman need that? And this apparently was handcrafted just for him because it featured his colors of blue and red. Now, one of the neat play features of the Justice Jogger was that it had a wind-up satellite dish on the side, and once you did that, the Justice Jogger would walk on its own. The Justice Jogger would fit one Super.Powers figure, and I could think of a dozen other heroes that were more deserving of a vehicle than a dude that can either fly or run super fast. I mean, think about Green Arrow. He doesn't have any powers at all. Let him take the Justice Jogger. Anyway, now that one figure, Superman in this case, that would sit in the seat, you had a flip-down shield or guard. I don't know why he would need that. The dude's bulletproof. But anyway, it's a pretty neat toy. With the scale of the Super.Powers figures, you could use the Justice Jogger for G.I. Joe. I mean, it's red and blue. Throw a little white in there, and you have an all-American Jogger chasing after Cobra. Again, people more deserving because they don't fly and run super fast. It's like when they gave Flash a car. Why? Anyway, this was just a quick look at 5 of the raddest rides in 80s toys. Now, I apologize if this episode seemed a little rough around the edges, but I was just excited to kick off this new series, so I kind of came to the table a little ill-prepared. But my excitement overruled everything, and I hope you enjoy it for what it is. I hope that next time the episode will be a little bit more well-polished, and I'm hoping this will be a regularly scheduled series here on out. Like I said, there are virtually hundreds of awesome 80s action figure vehicles. And yeah, will we hit them all? Definitely not. But we'll make a great run at it. Like I said, this is just the beginning. So tune in for more in the future. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. If you got something to say, please leave a comment. I love reading them, and I love getting back to everybody. And if you're new around here and you enjoyed this or any of the other episodes that YouTube is recommending down here, please hit subscribe. And if you hit that little bell icon, you will be notified whenever there's a new episode. So anyway, until next time, thanks for watching. Keep being rad and stay dorky!